Hi.
Hi,
Hiya.
I'm trying to see whether I can hear on the, say something.
Hi.
Well, I guess these don't work. Somebody's calling me. Hello?
Hello?
Ah,
Hello?
Hi, Connor.
Oh, just checking. Okay, it works. All right. Yeah, for some reason, my Mac Mini isn't great for Zoom, and I found this old laptop of mine, and it's much, much better.
That works.
you know, they're saying in the new rules that they're trying to set up, Connor, that you're going to have to be visible.
Oh, boy. Well, let me know when that comes into effect, and I'll find a more scenic spot. Polish my head.
Hey, John. You're muted, John.
I unmuted.
Now you are unmuted.
That's correct.
Oh.
Oh, guys, it's summertime.
Oh, at the lake.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that nice?
Beautiful.
What lake is that?
Indian Lake,
Uh-huh.
Adirondacks.
That's the only thing that Woodstock is missing, is a good swimming lake.
Well, Ulster County doesn't have a lot of lakes.
Yeah, I know. Oh. There we go.
Connor, how come you don't want us to see your face?
Oh, we were just talking about that. I'm just shuffling around my dirty clothes. I did a bunch of yard work today, and I don't know. I never really enjoyed being viewed.
Well,
I don't know. I like this. I should go to therapy and have them ask me that.
That's right.
See, it sounds like I may have to soon, in which case I will take more care to.
well, I was just judging by the what they're saying about the law that 4 people have to be present, which I think means that you guys who don't have health problems are going to be standing in for us people who do.
Absolutely.
I didn't like that as a rule. I think it's kind of dumb.
Yeah, I mean, I know I don't have health problems, but I do still have proximity to a nursing home, so that's an issue. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I know. As of right now, as far as the governor is concerned, it was through July something. July
We're
14th.
losing you. You're breaking up bad, Melissa.
Oh, I don't know why.
That was good.
Who knows?
So what's the story with the Zoom meetings?
The governor extended like last week, like through July 14th or something. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, they'll extend again, but I don't know. But Judy's right. What the town put into place says that 4 people, it'll be hybrid meetings, but there will have to be 4, I'll have to have a quorum here. And the door has to be open.
I don't know about you guys, but I only got part of that.
I don't
Me
blame
neither.
I don't
You got
blame
the
you
whole
at all,
thing,
Doc.
Judy?
I'm not interested in that arrangement either.
What arrangement? I'm sorry, I missed most of what she said.
She said if the town passes the law that they are considering, we would be allowed to have a hybrid meeting but 4 people would have to be present in the flesh to make a quorum, and the door would have to be open, although those of us who were still at a distance could vote.
Could
Only
not.
if,
Could.
only if there was a quorum here though, present. If there wasn't a quorum here, your vote doesn't count.
Really? Oh, boy.
Who gave them that bright idea?
I don't know.
I
No.
love it. Stuart.
Hi, Stuart.
You're
Mute.
muted, Stuart.
You're muted.
Am I muted now?
No.
Okay, good.
We have trees in the background. I like this.
Yeah, yeah. Goes with the theme of the environmentalist. No. Is that a birch behind you, John, over your left shoulder?
Yes, that's a white birch.
Yeah, nice.
Nice,
That's my bedroom window.
nice.
How do you like my new glasses?
Nice. They look good.
Yeah, okay.
Computer above and reading below. And since I have one eye distance and one eye close, they're not standard. They're actually prescription.
Wow. More importantly, what does your cat think about them?
I don't think she cares as long as I pet her the right way. She bit me again a couple of weeks ago. It looks like I have to never pet her on autopilot. If I'm going to stop paying attention, I have to put her down.
Oh, I mean, while you're driving. Yeah.
No, I
No.
mean, she's
What is-
bitten me 3 times in our life together. And
Wow.
once was several years ago, and twice were in the last month. And she really nailed me the last time.
That's not good.
So apparently, I need to give her a lot more play, but I also need to not pet her without paying attention.
Animals.
Brian doesn't have that problem with his cat.
Brian, you're muted.
He's also invisible.
Good evening, everybody.
Right.
Hey, Brian.
Good evening, Brian.
What's your cat's name, Brian?
Normal. N-E-R-M-A-L. But what you're
Norman?
looking at is normal,
Normal, like Garfield's nemesis.
correct.
Oh. Okay.
What you're looking at is Ernie, though.
Oh.
He's no longer with us.
Oh, Ernie.
Too bad.
Yeah, he was a good boy. Your kitty looks pretty chill right now.
She's pretty chill right now. She likes being up there when I'm online.
Hey, Connor,
Yes.
you want to be known as the con man?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is an old laptop that I found is more compatible with Zoom, and I guess that was my username.
You can change it.
You can change it.
All right.
Or keep
Or Melissa can change it for you since she's hosting.
Yeah, I don't know
No,
how
I
to
think
do
you do it
that.
on your own computer.
I think you look in the video, the little up arrow. Let's see.
Hey, I
Video
got
settings.
Connor.
I
Is
didn't wanna-
Connor okay? Can I just
That-
do your name?
That's fine.
There you go.
Yeah, I
Oh,
don't
look at that.
I don't see where to do it, but that's fine.
Voila.
Thank you.
Fixed it for you.
Where to do it for myself, but I know how to do it for somebody else when I'm hosting.
There we go. Well, let's
Are we
hope it
waiting
sticks.
For our chair. Oh, there he is.
Actually, Connor, if you go to the 3 little dots at the upper right corner of your own image, the menu includes a rename.
Hello, Laurel.
Should be good to go.
Ah, the power behind the throne.
That was you, John. Hi, John.
Hi, Lo.
Okay. Am I unmuted? Yes.
Sure.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Peter.
All right. This is going to be a little different workshop. So I'm going to do the intros and I guess Melissa's going to run the webinar. So,
I got my computer sorted out, but it's up to you, Melissa.
Okay.
Okay, so it is 6:30. I would like to call to order the regular workshop meeting of the Woodstock Planning Board for June 30th, 2022. We do have a quorum, and we have the minutes from June 16th. So if everybody's okay with them, I'd like to adopt them as is.
Second.
Okay.
All in
Okay.
favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Communications and announcements. We have an email from Howard Harris regarding the Burswood Center, and 2 emails from the lawyers, Woods and Jacobs, regarding the library. So, for scheduled business, we have a workshop webinar. We have actually 2 of them, and they are the Stream and Buffer Protection webinar series by the Hudson River Watershed Alliance. And protecting a healthy vegetated buffer area around streams is an important step to protecting the overall health, water quality, and stream itself. However, buffer protection can be challenging to implement. In this online webinar series, we discuss the science behind the stream buffers, current regulations, and what communities can do to protect streams and buffers. So, Melissa,
Perfect.
if you're going to run it, please
I'm
do
gonna run
so.
it. The first one we're gonna do, guys, is the science of stream buffers. So bear with me and we're gonna do this. There we go.
Yay.
Yay. All right, guys. Continuing ed credit. Yay.
My name is Emily Bale. I'm the executive director of the Hudson.
Oh, you have to click on the, there's a little button for sharing sound.
All right, where's that?
This is a
Get the controls back. Hit escape to get the controls back.
we're getting paid $1,000.
All right.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Pause. Now, what am I hitting, Judy?
There'll be a little button that says share sound. Can you see the controls
I
at
can't.
the bottom?
Oh, wait, if I do this.
Yeah, you need to get them back. And then I think you right click on that. I'm not remembering. Okay.
Bear with me, guys.
I have made this mistake more than once.
All right, mute my audio. Judy, where is it?
Okay, let me do it.
Okay.
Let me do it.
Share.
Unshare, and I'll get in there and do it. But you're going to have to give me permission.
I know.
Get continuing ed credits for learning how to do Zoom, maybe?
Ha, ha, ha.
Aha.
Actually, we should.
I'm learning
Right.
too.
How do I unshare, Judy?
You just click on the thing that says unshare.
But I don't see it.
Hit the escape. Hit escape.
Yeah, that didn't work. Okay. I have a grid. All right. I have everybody.
Okay. I've got this thing up. So let me see if I can do screen share. No, you have to, if you type escape, you should get a red screen, a screen along the bottom, and there's a red button that says stop sharing.
Ah,
There you go.
amazing. Thank you.
All right. Now I've got this. Now
Okay.
what I have to do is go to more and share sound. And this is the science of stream buffers. Is that what we want?
Yes. Sorry, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you
Perfect.
so much for joining us today. My name is Emily Vale. I'm the Executive Director of the Hudson
Okay.
River Watershed Alliance.
Perfect.
And you are in the Stream and Buffer Protection webinar series. So again, this is a Zoom webinar. We have it set up so that you don't need to have your camera turned on and you won't be able to speak, but we encourage you to use the chat function to introduce yourself and your affiliation, and then also the Q&A function during the talk to ask any questions that might come up. So thank you so much to our sponsors. This workshop webinar series has been organized by the Hudson River Watershed Alliance and the Hudson River Estuary Program, and sponsored by the Hudson River Estuary Program in cooperation with NUEPIC. For those of you who don't know us, the Hudson River Watershed Alliance works across the Hudson River watershed to unite and empower communities to protect their local water resources. And we do this through education, training, and networking. And you might be familiar with some of our past workshops, which looked like this. This was the workshop we held around this time last year on stream connectivity. And now it looks a lot more like this. This is probably a site that you're very familiar with at this point. This was our Watershed Roundtable in the spring. So the Hudson River Watershed Alliance works to support local watershed groups, improve intermunicipal coordination on water issues, and communicate as a collective voice. And now I'm going to hand it over to Beth Ressler to give an introduction from the Hudson River Estuary Program.
Thanks, Emily. So the Hudson River Estuary Program is a program of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Our mission is to help people enjoy, protect, and revitalize the Hudson River and its valley. And you can see the map here on the right-hand side shows the area that we cover, the watershed of the tidal Hudson. And our mission is built around these 6 benefits that are on this slide, and we're really excited to be working with the Watershed Alliance to organize this set of webinars about streams and buffers, because these systems are so important to meeting all of these key benefits that are on this slide. And I think a lot of our speakers are going to get into the details of that, and I also am going to be speaking in the next webinar next week, and I'll go into some of the details of some of the resources from the Hudson River Estuary Program specifically related to streams and buffers. And with that, I'll turn it back to Emily.
Great, thanks, Beth. So why are we talking about stream buffers today? The area where land and water meet is extremely important for stream health. And we know it's important for stream health from a water quality perspective, when we're thinking about flooding, when we're thinking about habitat, both aquatic and terrestrial. But protecting buffers around streams can be really challenging, and there's a lot of options and opportunities to do that. There's been a big focus on restoring buffers through the Trees for Tribs program, which Beth coordinates and which she'll be speaking about next week. But we wanted to really focus on the protection of stream buffers as the first line of defense in making sure our healthy streams stay healthy and we continue to have them play these really important roles. So this workshop webinar series was originally an in-person workshop that was probably going to look very similar to that photo that you saw that was scheduled back in April. And due to COVID-19, we had to switch gears and reorient this as a webinar series. So we just wanted to thank everyone for your patience and thank our speakers for being flexible. So this workshop webinar series will provide information on the science behind stream buffers to understand their role in stream health, which is today's talk, state level protection and resources that are available through the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, case studies on how municipalities and land trusts can protect stream buffers, and other local tools that are available for municipalities. So again, this is the first in a 4-part series. Today's September 9th, and we'll hear from Dr. Peter Groffman on the science of stream buffers. And then the other topics will be addressed in the coming weeks. So if you only signed up for today's session and you're interested in getting more information, you can sign up for the additional weeks as well. Just wanted to mention quickly a couple of our other upcoming events from the Hudson River Watershed Alliance. Tomorrow, we have our regular breakfast webinar. It's the second Thursday of every month at 8 a.m. And tomorrow's talk is with Dr. David Strayer on the value of water, looking at opportunities for economic valuation. And then at the end of October, between October 26th and 30th, we're planning to have our annual Watershed Conference online in the afternoons with more information and registration to come on that. So thank you again so much for participating in this. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Peter Groffman to speak to us about the science of stream buffers.
Good afternoon. I will share my screen and get started here. So I would like to start just by, I was just delighted to be
Is this part of the video?
asked to give this talk. I have been working on riparian buffers since the 1980s, and it's been a very interesting and dynamic area of research. And there's been a lot of good science has been done over that period of time. And then perhaps maybe more importantly, I think we've made real progress at the interface between science and society, and that we're taking the scientific information that we produce and making it useful for people that need to make decisions and protect streams on the ground. And just the presence, just the existence of this seminar series, which focused on that transfer of information from science to society, it's a huge improvement. You know, we didn't used to do this. I think it's always been a great challenge in science to communicate, and so I'm just delighted to be participating in this seminar series. And I get to talk about the science of buffers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about riparian zones and how they work, kind of reviewing some of the topics that Emily just mentioned, and then talk about some of the current science issues around stream buffers, about how wide should buffers be, a little bit about urbanization, and then a little bit about stream and riparian restoration as well. So let's get right into it. And again, this kind of summarizes what Emily made the point that riparian zones are just a cool place in the landscape. They're this critical interface between the land and the water. And because they sit in this unique spot in the landscape, they have unique soil conditions, unique vegetation conditions, unique hydrologic conditions. And because of those conditions, they are important to many things. And they're important to protection and support of the stream ecosystem by providing shade, by providing organic material, by stabilizing banks. They support unique biodiversity. Again, there's unique soil conditions, supports unique plants, which support unique animals. And then most relevantly to our topic, they form as a buffer zone for pollutants. That humans are doing a variety of things in the uplands that cause pollutants to move towards the streams, and riparian zones, because of their unique position, represent this critical interface. And there's been a lot of work on buffer zones for pollutants, in particular work on nitrate, which moves in groundwater and agricultural watersheds, and I'll describe that a bit. There's been a lot of work on hydrologic control of nitrate removal. Indeed, the buffer zones for pollutants are really an important tool in many parts of the world at very large scales. We're trying to solve coastal eutrophication problems in places like the Chesapeake Bay or the Gulf of Mexico. Buffer zones are an important component of that. And here's an old figure, a useful figure that was a USDA recommended specification for a 3-zone buffer model. And I think it's very useful for illustrating, to get us all on the same page about what buffer zones are. So you look at this, the first thing is their ability to protect the stream, and you look at this zone 1, and they're saying, you have mature trees on that bank, and they provide shade for the stream, they stabilize the bank, the leaves fall in the stream and provide support for the food chain of organisms in the stream. And as a general rule, it's like if you really leave the natural vegetation intact side of the bank, you're going to get a lot of value for protecting the stream ecosystem. Then you've got they specify zone 2 and zone 1. And there's things you can do in zone 1 and zone 2. You can maybe cut some trees for firewood here in zone 2. You could even grow hay in zone 3. But there's the idea that you need to think, that we think different things. We have different purposes for different zones next to the stream. This figure also shows connectivity, which is what's so critical to the function of these buffer zones. And so we have a cornfield, and we have water moving from the uplands towards the stream, the surface runoff, as shallow flow, and then also as groundwater. And so this is where the buffer zone function comes in. So I have surface runoff moving across the land. It has sediment in it. It might have other pollutants in it. And there's the hope that that water is going to infiltrate and be absorbed in the buffer zone. We have the surface flow and the groundwater flows moving through the buffer zone. And you can there's lots of opportunities for a groundwater filtering function in these buffers. You see there are roots down in the groundwater. There's organic matter and microorganisms in the surface soils. And so the groundwater has the opportunity to interact with the biologically active zone of the buffer zone. The surface runoff can be absorbed and can filter in. And so you have the buffering. So you have the buffering function, you have the stream protection function, and you have a variety of biodiversity functions within the buffer zone. This figure was originally drawn in the 1970s, and it was in the 70s when people really started to recognize that riparian zones were this critical interface in the landscape. But then things begin to get complicated. So right away people say, okay, all that makes sense to me. How wide should the buffer zone be? And then this is when the scientists turn pale and start to mutter jargon terms and back away and say, well, I don't know, it depends. And what the research over the last couple of decades has been is okay, we need to be able to provide some information for people on how wide should the buffer zone be. And so there are certain things that there are many things that we've learned, right? So it depends on what you want to do in the buffer zone. So for example, if I'm interested in providing habitat for birds, I need really wide buffer zones. If I'm interested in providing habitat for birds that require lots of internal forest area, I need a really wide buffer zone. So people talk about 100 meters or about 300 feet if you have interest in certain kinds of biodiversity support. If I'm interested in rare plants, maybe the rare plants just need a small patch of soil to survive, and so I need a much different kinds of width. So one of the things that we have learned is that if we can specify what it is that we're hoping to achieve, then that can give us a lot of guidance in terms of how wide our buffer zone should be. The other thing we've learned is that there's a strong need to know the site-specific conditions in our buffer zones. And as I've already pointed out, some kinds of biodiversity require specific soil types, but in particular, when we talk about this pollutant buffering function, we have learned that it depends strongly on soil and hydrologic conditions and connections. And so in particular, if we want to observe surface runoff, so think about some runoff moving into a buffer zone, what I want is well-drained soils that are pretty dry, and that are in a condition to absorb a lot of water. So I think about nice sandy soils with a nice litter layer on the surface. They're going to absorb a lot of surface runoff. These are going to be kind of dry, sandy soils. On the other hand, if I'm interested in filtering groundwater pollutants, I'm much better off with wet, mucky soils. And I'll give some examples of these. But again, I know we have quite a bit of data have been produced on if we're interested in runoff, here are the conditions that we need. If we're interested in absorbing groundwater, here are the conditions that we need. We're going to talk a little bit about hydrologic connections that can be as an overwhelming control on both the surface runoff and the groundwater filtering, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But one implication of this, and I'll talk about this as well, is okay, if indeed we have a strong need to know the site-specific conditions, so we need to map site-specific conditions, and that's important, but it can be challenging, and so we'll talk about what we're going to, where we are with mapping site-specific conditions at different scales. So here's a picture of a landscape that would be just great for absorbing runoff, and one way we have of looking at these landscapes is to map the soil drainage classes. So you can see. For soil, all soils are mapped with a drainage class: well-drained, moderately well-drained, somewhat poorly drained, kind of somewhat well, somewhat poorly drained. They're very poorly drained, really very poorly drained sites. They're really very finely resolved classifications of drainage class that indicate soil wetness as it's influenced by the position of the water table. So you look at this landscape, we have well-drained soils and moderately well-drained soils, and they mean these are dry soils. The water table is 1 or 2 meters below the surface. And what that really means in a functional sense is that this is going to be great for absorbing runoff, but not so great for filtering groundwater. And so if you think about if runoff moves into a site like this, there's this big dry soil profile that's going to absorb that water. And that depending on surface conditions, you'll get a lot of infiltration in a zone like that. And you'll get effective filtering of surface runoff. Groundwater, on the other hand, is not going to be affected by this riparian zone. You can see the groundwater is deep. It's below the root zone. It's deep in sands and gravels or clays that don't have a lot of organic matter. And so in these well-drained landscapes, and you can see this is controlled to a large extent by the fact that the stream is deep. It's an incised, or it's a deep stream channel, which influences the water table. This is a dry riparian zone, great for absorbing runoff, but not a lot of groundwater filtering capacity. In contrast, here's a different kind of landscape dominated by poorly drained soils, right? So you can see here we have moderately well-drained soils to somewhat poorly drained soils to poorly drained soils to very poorly drained soils. And what you can see is these very poorly drained soils are really wet. Water table is very close to the surface. Poorly drained soils are kind of upland wetland transitions, and then you move towards the upland. Now, in a site like this, they're going to be lousy at filtering runoff, right? So if a bunch of surface runoff moves into these very poorly drained soils, they're already wet, they're already saturated, so they're not going to absorb any water, and that runoff is just going to be transported right into the stream. On the other hand, if I have a plume, say from a septic system or an agricultural field or an urban area moving through this groundwater, as the groundwater moves towards the stream, suddenly it's going to run into a whole bunch of roots, it's going to run into a whole bunch of organic matter and microbial activity, and there's going to be lots of filtering of groundwater pollutions. Now this is, these two figures are summarizing many years of research by many years of people, but it's been useful research because it gave us a tool for making some predictions or recommendations about specific spots. So if you can go out to your riparian zone and you can map the soils there, then you can say something about the suitability of that area as a buffer zone for surface runoff or for groundwater pollution. And I think that's a useful finding if you can go out and map these soils. So soil type is an important controller and a predictor, and it's a useful tool for thinking about buffer zones. A trickier one is hydrologic connections, which are harder to map, but can be just an overwhelming control of how well these buffer zones work. And so here's a picture of a landscape with really nice connections between the upland and the groundwater. So here's my upland over here. Let's say this is a cornfield. Here's the groundwater. Here's the riparian zone. This is one of our very poorly drained riparian zones. And you can see this plume of water moves from the upland, moves into the riparian ecosystem, very close to the surface, lots of biological filtering. This is about as good as it gets, right, in riparian zones. Nicely connected, good soil conditions for groundwater filtering. Unfortunately, that's not the way it always works. So we have two types of connectivity problems in these riparian zones. The first one is caused by seeps or channelized flow. So sometimes you have a landscape with a particular shape. The groundwater is flowing across the landscape, and instead of going in the shallow subsurface of the riparian zone, it breaks out and emerges as a seep. You can see these; they're very common in completely forested landscapes. A lot of these if you hike around in the Catskills, you'll see lots of areas where there's just water bubbling up and flowing perpendicular to the stream across the riparian zone. There's also lots of human-induced seeps. So if we're doing a variety of things here that causes even a little bit of channelized flow in the upland, then that's going to break through the riparian zone, and you're going to get a channelized flow through the riparian zone. And this is just a disaster as far as filtering is concerned. It's not, if you have channelized flow, it's not going to absorb the runoff, and you're not going to have any groundwater interaction. So our first connectivity problem is the presence of seeps or channels. Now, seeps or channels, you can map. You can go out, you can observe them, and you can say, oh, I've got a seep or a channelized flow problem. The other connectivity problem is trickier, is this problem of deep bypass flow. And so we would like to think that that the water table would, the water is going to flow from the upland parallel to the soil surface, is going to flow through this biologically active zone of the riparian ecosystem and into the stream. But as is true of so many things in life, that's just not the way it always is. And frequently groundwater takes these deep bending paths. The water is pushed down either by hydrologic conditions or geologic conditions, and it takes these deeper flow paths. And so in some cases, the groundwater flow paths are going completely underneath the riparian zone, and then they're just bubbling up directly into the stream. This is vexing because I can look at this landscape and I can say, this looks perfect. I have a shallow water table. I have a nicely maintained biologically active riparian zone, but really I'm not getting a lot of filtering of either runoff or of groundwater flow because I've got these bypass groundwater flow paths. These are harder to map, and they're quite challenging. So I made the case that we have learned a lot about using information on soil and hydrologic conditions to predict riparian buffer zone function. So now the question is, how am I going to get information on the soil and hydrologic conditions in the buffer zones? And I would argue there have been tremendous scientific advances in this field, and also kind of advances at the interface between science and society, because we have all these groups now, whether they're conservation commissions or local environmental groups, who have got really good tools and they've got really good experience and going out and doing a lot of mapping. So at certain local scales, we can go out and make observations of these conditions. But at larger scales, we need to rely more on information that's available through a variety of portals, and that information flow has improved a lot. And I'll give an example here. So here's a lot of our work was done in on this was done in Rhode Island. Here's a USGS map. This is a 1 to 24,000 map, and it shows the kind of landscape that we're concerned about, right? So I've got a stream over here. I have some upland land use over here, some residential areas and some agricultural areas, and I've got this stream that I would like to protect. And I see that I've got some forested area around the stream, but I really want to know is, well, what are the soils and what are the hydrologic conditions within that riparian zone? Now, the traditional coverage, 1 to 24,000, is pretty good coverage. It doesn't tell me anything about what is really going on at the interface between this upland and this stream. But if I bring to bear some of these new coverages that are increasingly available, so they're high resolution stream maps, so 1 to 5,000 scale stream maps, and you can see instead of having just one stream, I actually have an entire stream network with a bunch of small tributaries, and each of these tributaries is surrounded by hydric soil. So we have very high resolution, or not even super high resolution, but high resolution, 1 to 15,000 scale hydric soil maps. And so now, with these new approaches, I have a pretty good picture of what's going on in this landscape. I've gone from this, which is really not telling me much, except that, I mean, maybe in 1985, I would have been happy to say, yeah, there's a stream, there's some forest around that. Isn't that great? I'll declare victory and say this is a good spot. But if I really want some functional understanding of what's going on, now I can see where the streams are. I can see that a bunch of these streams are surrounded by hydric soils that are going to be great for filtering groundwater. Some of my streams are not surrounded by hydric soils, and so they may be more suitable for absorbing surface runoff, or they may just not have suitable buffering conditions in them. I can see ponds on these high resolution coverages. Ponds are functionally very important in the landscape. And so our ability to just sit at our desks and come up with relatively high resolution depictions of what's going on in the riparian zones has improved enormously. I mean, this work was published in 2012, and things have continued to improve. There's more stuff available online. And then again, we can send people out in the field. Used to be pretty arduous work with surveying and looking at hand maps. And now, we do this when we work with students in class, and they laugh at us. They say, no, I'm not going to do any surveying, and I'm certainly not going to get the paper copy of the soil map out. I've got it all on my phone. And they map elevation, and you can identify plants and animals, and these become very powerful tools for doing these assessments either at our desks or out in the field, or some combination of the two. I think that's a big advance. And I'll skip that a little bit. Okay, so that's a little bit about about how riparian zones work and what are some of the tools we have for coming up. What are our goals for riparian zones? And again, I think we've got good science, and I think we have good tools for using that science at a variety of scales, from the local scale to much larger. Two other things I wanted to talk about were urbanization and restoration. And I'm going to talk a little bit about green infrastructure and some what I think is a very exciting area of research in green infrastructure, and then also a bunch of exciting research and application in restoration. So I think we're all grappling with urbanization. It's occurring pretty much everywhere. Its effect on watersheds is profound, mostly because you put impervious surface in these watersheds, and it just completely changes the way water moves through these watersheds. It accelerates the movement of water, and which has a variety of effects on hydrologic functions and biological functions associated with that. So I'll talk a little bit about what we call the urban stream syndrome and how that plays out in riparian zones. I'm also going to talk about some of the recent research about if we want to address the effects of the urban stream syndrome on riparian zones and streams, we need an approach that incorporates social science. And we have a variety of terms for this. We call it a social ecological approach. A lot of my training, I call myself a biogeochemist. And in recent years, I've gone from biogeochemistry to biogeosociochemistry. And this is, I think, pretty widespread in environmental science, that a lot of we will fail to solve a lot of our environmental challenges unless we much more aggressively incorporate a human dimension. And we got a couple of good examples of this in the urbanization. Okay, so how does urbanization play out in riparian zones? So we put impervious surface in a watershed, and it changes the way water moves from the uplands to the streams. And so here's our natural channel. We have the shallow riparian zone. We have a giant web of connections between the stream and this riparian zone. Again, the riparian zone is filtering the groundwater. The stream is providing water to the riparian zone. The riparian zone is feeding organic matter to the stream. And this is what we've been talking about, these idealized riparian zones. Urbanization, you put impervious surface in these watersheds, and it just beats the hell out of these riparian zones. So now we move water from the upland into the stream with tremendous energy. The rain falls on the pavement, and it goes zooming across the landscape into the stream. And it's just a lot of energy, and so it degrades the stream. So you end up degrading the banks, and you end up incising the stream just by washing away. And especially in watersheds that have an agricultural or a construction history, there's all the sediment that's piled up in the stream channel, and that gets washed away. And so we have these deeply incised stream channels. So all those connections that you see at the top are broken. The water table is deeper, so you don't have that groundwater filtering function. You don't have much flooding for the stream to feed the riparian zone. You have much less organic matter from the riparian zone feeding the stream, and you just have basically this is the urban stream syndrome as it plays out in riparian zones. And there's been a lot of research to show that has a variety of functional effects. And I think we've all seen pictures of this. You can see here are these incised streams. Here are the degraded banks. The trees are falling in. In lots of places, there's infrastructure next to the stream. Many municipalities have sewer lines next to the stream, and the sewer lines get degraded. We've seen this. We've been seeing this since the 50s. The urban stream syndrome, and more recently been seeing how that plays out in the riparian. Now we've been dealing with this problem since the 50s, and primarily the idea was, well, we're going to build detention basins. They're the kind of old-fashioned idea that we're just going to capture a bunch of the water that comes off the landscape, and reduce that degradation of the stream and the riparian zone just by breaking some of that energy, capturing some sediment. So here's a picture of and this is a pretty modern detention basin, because you can see it's got some vegetation in it, but it's collecting water from the subdivision, and then it's collecting in here, and then it's being released through the structure here. Now, we built enough of these detention basins that people began to be interested in what are the larger scale effects. I can design and build this detention basin for this small subdivision, but what effects are these having at the watershed scale? And what effects are they having on other functions, in particular some of the nutrient and other pollutant buffering capacity? And this work I'm presenting here was done by Neil Battez, who was a research scientist at the Carey Institute for several years, is now the supervisor of the town of New Paltz. And he started wondering, I got some of these scaling things. And he made this slide. You say, okay, so here's this landscape. How many detention basins are in this landscape? And if you could look at them, this landscape, how many can you find, right? So here's the one we were just looking at in the previous picture. You can see this little shape there. There's that shape. Here it is here. How many detention basins are in this landscape? Each of those stars represents a detention basin. Here, and there's one here, and there's one here, and there's one here. And you start to realize that maybe we're making enough of these that we are restoring some of that riparian function. And essentially what we have done is we have switched the interface, right? So the interface between the land and the water used to be right along this stream. But now we've degraded that stream, we've degraded that riparian connection, but we have displaced or moved that connection. So now the interface, instead of being in the stream channel, is now dispersed across the landscape, where each of these detention basins is functioning as a mini interface between the land and the water. This is pretty interesting, and it was an interesting way of looking at the landscape, and it was certainly interesting to the people who were designing these stormwater features, who were like, well, okay, originally, we were just trying to capture some water to meet a particular development mandate, but then suddenly, if we started to think about these in a more functional way, it kind of stimulates a bunch of really creative thinking about green infrastructure, and can we design them to do other things. And what's interesting is that a lot of the green infrastructure can mimic the structure of a natural landscape. So natural riparian areas, they naturally have this gradient where you go from dry uplands towards an upland to wetland transition down into a wet area. And that gradient, that natural elevation gradient, really is important for functioning, because I can be absorbing runoff, surface runoff over here, and I can get in groundwater filtering over here, and I can get a variety of types of functional zones in the natural riparian areas. And you see the same thing in lots of these stormwater management structures. So most of these stormwater management structures that we started looking at, and I'll show pictures of these, have drier, really dry zones, semi-dry zones, kind of transitional zones, and then some wet zones, kind of mimicking the structure of the natural riparian zones, but again, kind of in miniature in an engineered controlled setting in the uplands. So what Neil Battez was doing was, okay, so this is work we were doing in Baltimore. We're working in this one watershed, the Gwynns Falls, and we did an inventory of what types of stormwater management structures are there. So there's a bunch of these wet ponds, there's a bunch of these dry detention ponds, and then there's a bunch of really these dry infiltration practices. And there's a lot of them, right? So just in this watershed, there were several hundred of these factors. And you look at these, I guess one of the interesting realizations for us when we started looking at these is, so you start off with a hole in the ground to capture water, collects a bunch of sediment. Suddenly you have wetland plants, you have insects, you have birds. And then you start to look, this is a detention basin, and this is kind of a genuine ecological feature that is providing some biodiversity functions, and it's providing a lot of filtering functions. And so, and again, this has stimulated a huge wave of creativity of people saying, all right, we can design these to support wetland vegetation, or we can design these to support pollutant removal processes, or we can design these to support upland vegetation and types of insects and birds that are that we only find in grasslands. And so thinking about these in a functional context has stimulated really a lot of exciting work in green infrastructure design. Some of these are drier, like these dry detention structures, but they still got a bunch of wetland vegetation in the wet areas of them. You can see there's just a variety of these things that can be cleverly engineered, and they can provide lots of different functions. We started to measure some of these functions, and in particular, we were interested in this process called denitrification, which is a process that converts nitrate. Nitrate is the most common, it's a big form of nitrogen pollution. It comes from fertilizers and septic systems. It's a huge problem in coastal areas in places like the Chesapeake Bay or Long Island Sound. And denitrification is this anaerobic process, so in wet soils, that it converts that nitrate into nitrogen gas. And this is a real water quality maintenance process. And so we were really curious to see, could these detention basin features, these green infrastructure features, would they support denitrification like natural riparian zones? And so in these experiments, so Battez took samples from 5 different kinds of detention basins, right? So there's the wet ponds, and here are the wetter ones, here are the really dry ones. And he compared it with natural riparian zones, some forested riparian zones and some herbaceous riparian zones. And sure enough, these green infrastructure soils were supporting really high rates of denitrification. And this was some functional evidence that, yes, perhaps we have created a new interface between the land and the water. It's distributed across the landscape. It's engineered. And because of the engineering that really maximizes the interaction between the water and the soil, we get some real function, at least in the case of denitrification. And so that led us to the saying, well, our detention basin's the new riparian zone. And again, there's been lots of kind of exciting work trying to design green infrastructure, to evaluate green infrastructure, and to use green infrastructure to solve multiple functions. Okay, the other response to urbanization is restoration, stream restoration and riparian restoration. And I'll talk about that a little bit with some older work, but then on some newer work, talking about some of the complications associated with restoration. So again, here's our picture of the urban stream syndrome. For those of you who work in municipalities, you wake up at night thinking about these sites and what are we going to do about these sites? And so our work has mostly been in Baltimore, but Baltimore City and Baltimore County has a pretty aggressive program of saying where do we have the worst degradation, the worst examples of urban stream syndrome, and can we go restore them? This is an area that has developed really impressively over the last few decades, right? So the traditional solution to the urban stream syndrome is to put your stream in a pipe. You know, in Baltimore, you have a lot of these concrete channels. At least this isn't a buried concrete channel. In most cases, they just put the stream in a pipe. Nobody knows that it's there. And you can't really blame people for doing this, right? So we have a neighborhood over here. I have a stream that is just running amok across the landscape, and I can't let the stream eat away these people's yards or destroy the infrastructure next to the stream. So we put them in these straight channels. But these were not appealing aesthetically, they weren't appealing biologically, and so there was a real desire as suburbanization spread out across the landscape to develop more sophisticated approaches to stream restoration. And so you can see here's a kind of a fancy stream restoration project, and you can see that they're trying to design pool and riffle sequences, so you get some natural stream features. You're trying to get some meandering in the stream, very active revegetation of the riparian zone, and this kind of making this kind of natural sloping so that you can get some interaction between the stream and the riparian. Now, as a scientist, we were super interested to look at these projects because they're pretty sophisticated projects. But when we first started looking at them, we came up with what we called the plastic fruit hypothesis. And we hypothesized that these streams were going to be like a plastic banana, which might look right, but it has no nutritive value because there was no organic material. Like we saw all this riprap and all this gravel, and we said, well, maybe this is going to look good, but it's not going to do anything. And you can see that he doesn't look very happy in that picture. See, he's kind of grimacing at those. We think the plastic fruit hypothesis actually was wrong, because you set these sites up and you come back a year later, and they really look pretty good, right? So there's a lot of biology here. The riparian zone very actively revegetates. These pool and riffle sequences capture organic matter. So there's lots of leaves and organic matter piling up in the stream. And so we started to collect, lots of people in many places have started to collect data that these streams, if they're designed well and constructed well, they can provide a whole bunch of biological functions. And some of these designs are really quite clever. You know, they design different types of restorations for different types of stream reaches. So in some cases, I've got a narrow reach. I've just got to move the water through a stream reach without letting it interact with the surrounding environment. I've just got to transmit the water through it. But in other places, there are opportunities for letting the stream kind of wander into the floodplain, or letting floodwaters reconnect into the floodplain, and so we've been measuring things like denitrification or amphibians and other types of components of biodiversity. And some of these restoration projects are really helping provide buffering functions and other functions as well. So stream restoration, and again, like with the green infrastructure, this is stimulating just a flood of creative work where people are like, for one thing, it's like $5 or $6 or $8 billion a year is being spent on stream restoration. And this has focused the mind of many people who are interested in designing streams that are going to be functional, that are going to last, and it's just a very exciting area of research. The real challenge in this research, a little bit, I'm going to point is to the social ecological component of stream restoration. And so you can see there are houses next to these areas, and we cannot deny that there's a real strong human dimension in stream restoration projects. So, for example, we were wandering around in the stream, and we said, I wonder if you restore the stream, does that increase the property value of these houses, right? And you think, so if you increase the property value and you increase tax revenues for the municipality, does that help to pay for the stream restoration? And it was a simple question, and we did some econometric analysis of real estate values, and indeed, if you restore the stream behind the house, it does increase the resale value. That's the easy part. The real part is what do people want these restorations to look like, right? So can we design these restorations so that we're going to increase people's interaction with the stream to get a nature benefit? If we increase people's interaction with the stream, is that going to cause degradation of the stream? We have a bunch of people wandering around the stream. And so the human dimension is actually super complex. We have we have learned to engage with people and ask them what would you like the stream restoration to look like? In many cases, they tell us things that we don't want to hear. So, for example, if we ask people, what would you like this restored stream to look like? They say, I would like a bicycle path and an ice cream kiosk. Right now, in terms of habitat, biodiversity functions or buffering functions, a bicycle path and an ice cream kiosk is probably not what I want. But on the other hand, ice cream kiosk, and a bicycle path. And so there's a lot of complexity in the human dimension. And some of it is kind of positive, and some of it can be problematic. So I'll give an example of one project in Baltimore, Stony Run. So the Baltimore Department of Public Works has done a very good job of prioritizing streams for restoration. And Stony Run is a stream that runs right through the middle of residential areas in Baltimore, lots of different neighborhoods. Stream was highly degraded, and this was prioritized for restoration. And the DPW, Department of Public Works, had a series of best practices for engaging with the community, lots of communication, lots of meetings. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're hoping to achieve. Here's how this is going to work over time. And they did that. Then when they got out there to do the restoration, these are big projects. And so there's a lot of construction, there's bulldozers, and there's cutting down of trees. And so when the people in the neighborhood saw what this looked like, there was tremendous resistance. Lots of complaining, lots of controversy. And then the great nightmare of all of us who work in the environmental field, an article in the local paper saying, why is the city spending millions of dollars to bulldoze trees? What kind of technology is this? Outdated, discredited, and destructive. And this was kind of heartbreaking for us as scientists, and we weren't the municipal decision makers who were really on the hook with this. But it really made the case that unless we really aggressively deal with the human dimension in these projects, we're going to have big failures at the interface between science and society. Now, our work in Baltimore is long term, right? So this article is from 2006, and if you go out to and even if you go back a year later to Stony Run, it looked a lot better. You could see it stabilizes, it starts to redevelop. If you go to Stony Run now, it looks great. Right? The riparian zone is actively revegetating. There's a lot of human interaction with that stream. There's a bunch of walking paths by the stream. You have teenage kids back there doing what teenage kids are doing back in the woods, and it looks great now, but it was a very, very painful process. And there was some researchers, Johns Hopkins, went out and resurveyed the community to see how their attitudes have changed. But we have to avoid things like this with these stream restoration projects. I give the Stony Run an example, and we'll talk about there's this idea in environmental science now, as environmental science has kind of evolved into a more general sustainability science, right? And sustainability science says we have a triple bottom line, that for all our efforts, we need to consider environment, economics, and equity. And equity involves many aspects of the human dimension. And we're learning from sustainability science that if we don't consider the triple bottom line, we're going to fail in our efforts, right? And this is the case here in our efforts to restore the stream. Yes, we have to get the ecology and the site design right, and we have to get the economics right. But unless we engage with the community, especially in an equitable way, we're going to have problems. Okay, I want to talk one more thing about stream restoration. There's really a lot of stream restoration that's going on. This is one of our sites in Baltimore, one of these old concrete channels. There's still a lot of these concrete channels across the world. There's still a lot of these basically kind of ditches around the world, and lots of stream restoration. So this is work in Baltimore County, a place called Scotts Level Branch. This is beautiful restoration. You can see they've planted a bunch of trees. They've kind of made a nice meandering stream. They're under extraordinary pressure to reduce nitrogen loading to the Chesapeake Bay. So they're very interested in making these restored streams have some ability to take up nitrogen. And this is, and I'm getting very much to the end, so I've saved my data slide for the end. But so we've been making lots of measurements of nitrogen uptake in these restored streams. And I'll draw your attention to the middle bars here, and especially panel E and F. These are measurements of nitrate uptake. How aggressively is the stream taking up nitrate and converting it into a more stable form? And you can see that in these restored streams, they are really taking up more nitrate than the unrestored streams. And that's really a good result. It's because, again, you get nitrogen credits for this. And so we see that there's a real functional benefit for the stream restoration. But the challenge is a lot of that is driven by light. So these restored streams, because either they didn't have trees when the project began, or the trees were cut down as part of the project, there's a lot more light shining on that stream. And if you shine light on the stream, it makes the algae grow more, and the algae take up more nitrate. So we have this nitrate uptake increase, which is good, but a lot of it which is driven by the fact that there's more light because there's no trees. And so this is a real kind of mechanistic conundrum, because people don't like the fact that the trees are removed and the trees are going to grow back. Will this increased uptake fade over time as the new canopy develops? I end with this to remind us that this is still a very active area of science, right? So we've been working on riparian zones for a long time. We've learned a lot of things. We have learned how to communicate a lot of that information to people in a useful way, but there's still a lot that's unknown. And so there's excitement about green infrastructure, there's excitement about stream restoration, but there's still a lot of active science going on. And this, to me, is just a great example where we've created a real mechanistic conundrum that we're going to have to sort out over time. So in conclusions, as we go on to the rest of the seminar series, I've hoped, just to provide some of the scientific basis for why buffer zones and riparian areas are important components of the landscape. There's been a lot of good science, and we've been able to quantify those multiple benefits. And I think perhaps more impressively to me, we've developed some tools for letting people use that science to actually manage actual landscape. The other thing I hope you'll take away is that this is an active area of science, and there's a bunch of kind of basic biophysical science and how does this green infrastructure work? How does the stream restoration work? What are the mechanisms of buffering going on in these areas? And there's a lot of new science that's going to come out. I think the most exciting and challenging science, though, is going to fall within the rubric of sustainability science, where we've got to meet that triple bottom line with environment, economics, and equity. And unless we really engage with that human dimension, our efforts will not be successful. I feel that we're poised for great success because we've got this new sustainability framework and more of a focus on the bottom line. And I think we're poised for great success over the next few years. And I thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter, for your presentation. We've had a couple of questions come in. If you are watching this and you have questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask those. That'll be easier for me to find than in the chat. So the first question was where to find the high resolution stream data layers that you mentioned, if you have any advice on that.
Yeah, so you see that question, I do not know the answer. And I suspect that I would start searching in the state resources and then county resources and then federal resources. But I suspect that if you think about the way our wetland laws are made, the federal the federal laws are pretty coarse. The state laws are a little more finer, but the really fine resolution laws are at the local scale. And so I would try at all those levels to see where those are. And I could do, if you send me an email later, I could ask someone to find.
Great, thank you. We have a question. What actions result in the lowering of the water table in a riparian zone? You showed a couple of pictures that showed that level lowering.
Yeah, so sometimes riparian zones are naturally dry. If it's a landscape where the geologic structure is such that the streams have naturally cut down, and so there the groundwater is naturally going to be deep. But what we see in urban areas is you think about a stream in most of the eastern part of this country. There's been a lot of agriculture and disturbance in the uplands, and so the streams and the stream channels have piled up sediment. Maybe 1 or 2 meters, 3 or 6 feet of sediment have piled up in the streams in the riparian zones. And when you urbanize these landscapes and you start to put a lot of runoff into those streams, so you change the energy regime of the watershed and the energy regime of the stream, and all that legacy sediment that's piled up is very susceptible to erosion. So the riparian zone, so the sediment that's in the riparian zone kind of stays there, but the stream just gets eaten away. And it's really interesting to go wander around in urban streams, because you can see in many cases they have eaten their way down to the bedrock. And so the stream now will have like a hard rocky bottom, and habitat for the stream insects, they require, like, they call it embeddedness is the term. They need a little sediment to kind of snuggle in there, but these streams are so incised, and the runoff is so strong that you just don't have any sediment left in the stream channel. And then you can see the riparian banks. You can see layers and layers of sediment. Sometimes you can see where the original stream layer was, back in pre-settlement times. And then you can see all that sediment from human land use piling up on top. And so it's a mixture. It's definitely a combination of legacy sediment and then a whole bunch of stormwater eating it away. It's interesting. I just have to say it's interesting. This is a geomorphic process. And when we got out into these urban streams, we started seeing this geomorphic process, and we were very excited to discover this process. And then we look back in the geomorphology literature, and we realized that the geomorphologists were very excited when they discovered it in the 60s. And from a scientific point of view, it was a classic example of sometimes we think we're discovering something new, but if we do some scholarship, we find out that other people have found the same thing in many years before us too.
Thank you. Can you speak to the difference between a detention and a retention pond?
Yes. I mean, so yes and no, right? So the thing I will say is that the types of green infrastructure, there are many different types of green infrastructure, and they all have many different names. But the basic differences in many of them is how long are they designed to hold water. So we have some that are filtering processes, which are small things, and they're not supposed to hold water at all. They're supposed to have water, supposed to go in there, and it's supposed to infiltrate into the ground somewhere where I can't see it, like maybe into my neighbor's basement. I don't know, but they're not designed to hold water. Others are designed to hold water for a short period of time. Others are designed to hold water for a medium period of time, and others are designed to be wet, to function as wetlands. And so the difference between detention and retention, what you have is a whole suite of processes that are designed to do different things with water. And I think originally we started where most of them were, I'm just trying to hold the water for as short as possible and then get rid of it. But now they've realized that, well, if you can hold water and you can develop some of these wetland type of features, then maybe that's worthwhile. And so there's now really a wide range of detention, retention, wet ponds, dry ponds, all depending on what they do with the water and what they're trying to achieve.
Great, thank you. Was the denitrification analysis done on different soil types to determine if soil type affects the ability of the detention pond to remove nitrogen?
Yes, and so we have been sampling lots of detention ponds and features in lots of places, and And so there's a lot of interest in what kind of soils are used in these features, right? So in many cases, especially for the highly engineered features, you're using engineered soils which are made to certain specifications. And we were quite concerned that some of these soils were not going to have a high capacity for biological activity, including denitrification. But denitrification is not a super subtle process. And so if the soil is wet and it's got some organic matter in it, it's going to denitrify. And so some of these soils, and as you can see, we found very high denitrification rates in these detention basin soils and these stormwater functions just because the soils were wet, the soils had organic matter in it, and they denitrified quite nicely. And in that paper, we collected a lot of data which are publicly available. And we do the synthesis work. We had a student just got her PhD doing the synthesis work. She took hundreds of measurements that we've made over the last 20 years, and they all fall out. If you plot denitrification potential versus soil moisture and denitrification potential versus organic matter content, it falls out pretty well. And it's almost too simple, right? For a scientist, I'm not supposed to give simple answers, but if the soils are wet and they've got some organic matter, they're going to denitrify, and that's a useful finding.
Great, thank you. We're focused on riparian buffers around flowing water, but do ponds and lakes have riparian buffers as well?
Yeah, for sure. And again, the interface between a pond and a lake and the upland is also super important, and for lots of the same reasons. Now, like things like stream shading, right? So if you have a big pond, so then the edge effect is not that big, but certainly in small ponds, the presence of vegetation around the pond provides shading, and it provides organic matter, and it stabilizes the banks. And so there's, especially in the Midwest where they have a lot of lakes, there's a lot of work with landowners next to the lakes to manage the interface between the lake and the upland much more carefully. And in particular, we all have a desire to take away dead wood, right? So we have dead logs floating in the stream, and I don't know, we all seem to have an irresistible desire to pull those out and take them away. And the dead wood's like super useful, right? It's super important for fish habitat and for all kinds of stabilization things. And so there's been a lot of good work of engaging with landowners next to the lakes to manage the land a little more carefully.
Great. We've got a number of questions coming in related to buffer width. So I'm going to try to summarize maybe 3 different questions, also acknowledging that we have 3 more sessions in this series where we'll be talking more about buffer width and how local municipalities decide the width of buffers to protect. So we have one question about having a community using a rule of thumb of double the stream width. Is there a rule of thumb that can be used for buffer regulations? We've got it. I'm just going to give you all the questions, Peter, and then maybe you can give a broad brush.
And if they're too hard, I'm going to have a connection problem. I can tell right away.
Understood. That's fair enough. This stuff is hard, and that's why we're doing it. We have a question about buffer protection along intermittent streams that tends to be narrower, but wondering about the science to support that. And then also a question around width depending on the aquatic connectivity to the uplands, if there might be situations where a buffer isn't helpful and other avenues might be pursued. So just throwing 3 very different questions at you at once.
But I'm just glad to hear that these are still the questions, right? Because again, when I started back in this in the 80s, I was all excited. I was doing science that was relevant to society, and people just killed me. Like they were right away. Well, how wide should the buffer zone be, guy? And I was like, I don't know. I still don't know. But the answer is it really depends on what you're trying to do in that buffer, right? So the idea of a rule of thumb that the buffer zone should be twice the width of the stream has great appeal, right? It's clear. Everyone understands it. If you had a buffer zone that's twice the width of the stream, you're going to get some level of stream protection. I can't argue that that's not a useful thing. But it depends on, are you hoping that buffer is going to provide shading for the stream? Are you hoping that it's going to process surface runoff? Or are you hoping that it's going to process do groundwater filtering? Now, if you need it to shade the stream, well, then you're just going to have to make sure it's wide enough to support the growth of some mature tree vegetation. And in some cases, that's just that's not going to be wide enough. If you're interested in surface runoff or groundwater filtering, a lot's going to depend on the on the soils there. Do you have wet soils or do you have dry soils there? And so I guess the recommendation we have had is if you can be specific about what you're trying to achieve, then it becomes easier to say how wide the buffer should be. But in many cases we don't. We just have a design, an idea that it would be a good idea to protect these streams, and so then you can say, okay, we're going to come up with some kind of rule of thumb about twice the width of the stream. Not super specific, but it certainly scores very high on transparency and being clear to people. So I'll say that. With intermittent streams, right? So intermittent streams are just super important, right? So we think about these kind of, we'd like to think about like hotspots in the landscape or flash points of reactivity in the landscape. And intermittent streams are irresistibly exciting in that way, and that they're dry, and lots of things happen during the drying down period, and then there's this flash of activity during the wet up period. And so intermittent streams they're super important for connectivity in the landscape, both riparian protections for the intermittent streams, but then also longitudinally down the stream. Like all of our streams in the headwaters, most of them are intermittent for long periods of time. And lots of stream ecologists spend a lot of time wringing their hands about trying to get people to recognize and protect intermittent streams. And so I just think we need to constantly recognize that, yes, even though the stream is dry for a while, it's connected and plays an important role. And so they need to be protected. The last question about are there some areas where the buffer zone wouldn't help? I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but one of the great things about riparian buffer zones is they have multiple benefits, right? So, and that's always I think has been a helpful concept of the interface between science and society. Okay, maybe I would like to, if I restore a riparian buffer zone of some width, it may not do everything I want. It may not do the specific thing that I'm most interested in, but it's not going to make things worse. And I can't think of any scenarios where it makes things worse. And so I'm not sure what the question was, but there is the general idea that I can't think of any examples where they make things worse.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a number of other really great questions, but we've reached the end of our time here. So Peter, if you have any publications or any additional information that you can share, we have a list of resources on our website, and I'd be happy to add those. We got a couple other questions asking about specific nitrate levels and detention pond function, and thinking you might have some resources to share that might help explain.
I will send you some papers, and the scientific papers are great. If you're having trouble sleeping at night, you sit down with these and you'll be out really fast. And I think that what's really exciting is groups like the Hudson River Watershed Association who are working that interface, like people who are waking up in the morning and saying, okay, I can understand the science, and how can I translate this into a format that other people can understand. And so I'm super excited to participate in something like this, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the series.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Peter, and thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. We've been recording this webinar, and I will be posting that and sending around a link to everyone who registered. For those of you who had some technical issues and then joined later, thank you so much for your perseverance and joining us today. And we hope to see you all next week at the same time, 1 p.m. for the next part of our series. So thank you so much.
Bye.
Judy, it's stream buffer protection and action.
Sorry, say it again.
Stream buffer protection and action.
Okay. I don't know where that is, and I have to get rid of this so I can see the whole screen. That's not it.
No.
Nope.
Go
Okay.
back to the initial.
I got to go back out. So let me get rid of this. Okay, here we go.
No, I don't think it's there. Yep.
Okay.
That one.
This one?
Yep.
Okay, good. I'm sorry for the occasional interruption. When I try to do anything, it messes with it.
Thank you so much for hosting.
Great. So we'll go ahead and get started. Please continue to introduce yourself if you're joining. My name is Emily Vale. I'm the Executive Director of the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, and you are in our Stream and Buffer Protection webinar series, part 3 of 4. This workshop has been organized by the Hudson River Watershed Alliance and the New York State DEC's Hudson River Estuary Program, and sponsored by the Hudson River Estuary Program in coordination with NUIPIC. So thanks so much to the Estuary Program and NUIPIC for helping to support this work. The Hudson River Watershed Alliance is a nonprofit that works throughout the Hudson River watershed to unite and empower communities to protect their local water resources. And we do that through education, training, and networking through programs like this one, and also through our Watershed Roundtable that's pictured here. So today we are talking about protecting streams and their buffers. And we're talking about this in particular and devoting this 4-part webinar series to the topic because the area where land and water meet is a really dynamic space and really important for stream health, thinking about water quality, stream stability, flooding, habitat, and so on. And protecting buffers around streams can be really challenging, and there are a lot of different options for undergoing stream protection. So this webinar series lays out some of those. So if you missed some of the earlier presentations, those are available. Recordings of those presentations are available on our YouTube channel and also on our project website. We had a talk from Dr. Peter Groffman on the science of stream buffers. Last week, we heard from New York State DEC on state regulations and resources. And today, we're zooming in now to the more local or municipal scale to learn more about stream buffer protection in action, thinking about the roles of local laws and also land trusts in protecting stream buffers. So thank you again for joining us. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark Carabetta from Milone and McBroom.
All right, thank you everyone, and thanks Emily and the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, and hello everyone. I was watching everyone sign in on the chat there, and it seems like there's a real wide-ranging audience, which is good to see. I was asked to talk about the Wetland and Watercourse Protection Law of the town of New Paltz, and also my experiences as the Wetland Inspector here in New Paltz, so I'll hit on both those things. So here's an outline, and I think I have about 20 minutes or so to cover these items, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some discussion. So the Wetland and Watercourses Protection Law of the town of New Paltz is found in Chapter 139 of the Town Code, Wetland and Watercourse Protection. And as I go through this presentation, I've copied some of the language from the code. The code's about 50 pages long, and I just tried to highlight some of the important things there that I wanted to emphasize. So the purpose of the law is stated as preventing the despoilation and destruction of wetlands, water bodies, and watercourses, and their associated buffer areas. And collectively, these are referred to as regulated areas, and I'll go through some of the definitions of those regulated areas. And the law regulates certain activities within those regulated areas. And the activities are fairly self-explanatory. I won't go into those too much. And one important aspect of the New Paltz law is that it is intended to be concurrent jurisdiction with the state and federal wetland protection. So it's not intended to supersede or conflict with it in any way. It's a concurrent review. And one aspect of the law is that it defines a wetland inspector. And this is an agent appointed by the town board to fulfill certain enforcement and permit processing responsibilities that are set forth in the code. And so the wetland inspector, since 2018, in June of 2018, our firm, Mylone and McBroom, has been retained as the wetland inspector for the town. Our office is here in New Paltz, and we fulfill those duties mostly with two people. Myself, I'm a professional wetland scientist since 2000. And then I'm assisted in this wetland inspector role by Ellen Hart, who's an environmental scientist and planner who works with us here in this office. So I've listed here some of the duties of the wetland inspector, assisting the town board and the building inspector with permit application reviews, site visits, occasionally addressing violations, and there have been some during my time here. Most of those stem from either a person not realizing that there's a town wetland code, or not understanding what the regulated features are within those code, or not realizing that they have them on their property. And then conducting inspections, which is kind of what makes this assignment interesting, because it allows me to interact with property owners in town and explain to them and educate them about the law and about wetlands. So the inspections, and the way it's defined here, owners of property in New Paltz who aren't sure if there are regulated features or regulated areas on their property, they could request an inspection from the wetland inspector at no cost to them. It's kind of one freebie. They're allowed to ask that the wetland inspector visit their property one time per lot if it hasn't been inspected in the past. So for example, a landowner who may be wanting to put a shed on the back part of their property, they may have me come out and I may take a look and say, there's wetlands over on this part of your property. There's a 100-foot associated buffer area associated with those wetlands. And if you could keep your shed outside of that buffer area, then you would not be required to obtain a wetland permit from the town. And so that conversation and that process is what makes up these wetland inspections. And it's covered a whole range of topics and discussions in my experience over the last 2 years. So this is a list of the regulated areas that are covered in the law, and I'll go through each of these. I'll try and move through them fairly quickly. So they're intermittent watercourses, perennial watercourses, water bodies, quality vernal pools, and freshwater wetlands. And then each of those regulated areas has an associated buffer area associated with it, and the size of that buffer varies depending on the feature and its size and a few other factors. So I'll cover that as well. And in addition to the wetland code itself, there's also a Wetland and Watercourses Map that's made available by the town. And it's made up of these layers that you see listed here: federal wetlands from the National Wetland Inventory, DEC mapped wetlands, watercourses and ponds, and then the associated buffer areas. And like any map at this scale, once you zoom into an individual property, it's not always accurate at the scale of those properties. And that just means if you look at this map and you look at your property and you see that there's no wetlands on your property, but there's some nearby, once you actually walk that property and look at the features, these boundaries that are shown on this map are general. They might not be exactly accurate to the fine scale, which is why these property visits and inspections are important. So starting with intermittent watercourses, and I know we got into this, Corbin got into this a bit last time about the distinction between perennial and intermittent watercourses. And he referred to them as long linear ecosystems, which I like that definition. And for the purpose of this code, the intermittent watercourse is one that flows on a seasonal basis, not continuously throughout the year. And it flows for at least 3 consecutive months in a 12-month period in most years. And these intermittent watercourses, I have sort of a schematic on the bottom. They have an associated buffer area of 50 feet. So if you're within 50 feet of that intermittent watercourse, you'd be required to go through the regulatory process with the town. And just like it's important to understand what is protected or what is included in this definition, it's also important to understand what is not. So there's another part of the definition here. The definition does not include waterways designed specifically for stormwater conveyance, such as grassy swales and drainage ditches. So this photo on the bottom, that's along Clearwater Road in New Paltz near the playing fields there. And that's a roadside ditch for stormwater, and it probably doesn't flow for 3 months anyways, but it would not be included in this definition of a intermittent watercourse. And then moving on to perennial watercourses, so these flow continuously through the year. The definition is fairly straightforward. And most watercourses, perennial watercourses in the town, have a 100-foot water buffer area associated with them. In the case of the Wallkill River, which of course is a large watercourse that flows right through the center of New Paltz, there's a 200-foot associated buffer area for the Wallkill. And then water bodies are defined, as you see there, a lake or a pond. And there's a size criteria. It must have an area greater than 1/10 of an acre to be regulated. And then the associated buffer area varies depending on the size of that feature. So if it's less than an acre, there's a 50-foot associated buffer area. And if it's greater than an acre, it's 100 feet. And again, what is not included in that definition, detention and detention basins and infiltration basins. So if you as part of, say, a subdivision, you're required to construct on-site stormwater detention, and that site grew up into a cattail area, that would not be included in this definition. And then quality vernal pools is another regulated feature. And this definition is a little more complicated. It's an area, has a minimum size criteria of 100 square feet. And these are defined as seasonally flooded isolated pools, naturally occurring in a confined basin or depression with no permanently flowing outlet. They either dry up during the year or for some other reason do not contain reproducing fish. And in order to qualify as a quality vernal pool, you need to see evidence of breeding by one or more species of obligate vernal pool species. And there are a whole list of them within the code, and I've included 2 examples here, some nice information from the Vernal Pool Association website, and they have a lot more on the characteristics and definition of vernal pools. And these could be a little tricky to identify and verify that they are in fact a quality vernal pool that meets the definition because of their ephemeral nature. And these are photos of one vernal pool in my neighborhood. The one on the left is taken in the winter time or perhaps early spring, and you can see there's ice on it and it's flooded and there's no vegetation. And as you move into summer and fall, these dry up, they're ephemeral, and their hydro period is ephemeral. And once leaves come out on the trees and transpiration increases, they dry up very quickly. So it's kind of a race against time for those obligate vernal pool species to be able to complete their life cycle before it runs dry. And for that reason, most of the time you need to get out there in the springtime when those vernal pool indicator species are present in order to verify that it is a vernal pool. So in some cases, if one of these is identified on a property, we really have to wait until the springtime to be able to confirm that that actually is a quality vernal pool that meets that definition. Moving on now to wetlands. Under the definition, this is an area, a regulated area that is comprised of hydric soils and also has a prevalence of vegetation typically adapted to life in saturated soil conditions. And we'll get into those 2 characteristics, hydric soils and vegetation adapted to saturated soil conditions, as we go along. Now, in order to meet the definition, it must have an area of greater than 1/10 of an acre. And similar to the ponds, the water bodies, the associated buffer area varies depending on whether it's greater than an acre or less than an acre. And again, what is not included is detention and infiltration basins. So a little bit about soils. I mean, soils, hydric soils are one of the features that are used to identify wetlands and delineate wetland boundaries. And if you see a wetland scientist in the field, they will frequently have a Dutch auger, as you see on the right there, that's used to collect a soil sample and examine the soil. Sometimes when I visit properties, people will see that Dutch auger and they'll think it's some sort of magical sort of dowsing rod that somehow detects wetlands, and it kind of is, but you need to have some knowledge in order to use it. You dig down into the soil, and another tool that the wetland scientist will have is a Munsell soil color book, which I have here on my desk, and that's a page from it in the center photograph, and you use it to characterize the color of the soil. And on the left is a photograph of some hydric soil, and because it's exposed to anaerobic conditions, because it's flooded and saturated through the year, there is redoxomorphic features that develop in the soil, and this stands for reduction and oxidation, usually of manganese and iron, that takes place in the soil, and it results in concentrations and depletions of these minerals. So you see what's called mottling in the soil, which you see in the bottom right photo. You see those brown and gray flecks. That's called mottling, and that's an indication of hydric soils. And often hydric soils will have a low chroma. There's hue value in chroma, the different characteristics that make up the color of the soil. And as they go through that reduction and of those minerals, they end up having a lower chroma soil, usually in that 1 or 2 range. And that's another feature that's used to identify those hydric soils. And another sort of misconception that I hear sometimes during the wetland inspections is that, you know, if I come out in the springtime or after some rain and the ground is wet, that the wetlands are going to be much larger than they are in the dry season. And the reason that that is not the case is because although the water in the wetland may change throughout the season, those soil characteristics take a long time to change when the hydrology of the wetland changes. So it's a pretty reliable and static feature of the wetland that doesn't change very much, or if it does change, it changes gradually over many years. So it really doesn't matter. It would be difficult to delineate wetlands when the ground is frozen and when there's no plants. But other than that, it really can be done any time of the year, unless you've got a vernal pool where there's certain obligate species that you need to verify are there. And then, of course, the other part, in addition to soils, that's key to identifying the wetlands, is the presence of hydrophytic vegetation. And these are, as the language in the code, vegetation typically adapted for life in saturated soil conditions. So how do you know that? You go and you look at the dominant plants that are there in the wetland. You might do a transect or a plot to determine which species are dominant. And then you use this publication or some version of it. This is put out by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's a national plant wetland list, and you could, using their website, you could customize it for the state of New York or for wherever your region is, and it lists all plants that are found in wetlands within your region, and each of those plant species has a rating associated with it that tells how likely that plant is to occur within a wetland. And it kind of works on this scale here. They range from obligate species, obligate wetland species, which pretty much the only time you find them is in a wetland. They almost always occur in wetlands, very few exceptions, greater than 99% of the time under natural conditions. And then that ranges all the way up to obligate upland species, which are pretty much never found in wetlands. And then in between, you've got those other categories. So each plant species has this code associated with it. So if you go into a wetland, and these are some recent observations of wetland plants I've made, you see the plants I've listed here, each one has the the rating associated with it. And in this case, if you did an inventory and these 6 plants were the dominant plants, you see that they're all obligate wetland species or facultative wetland species. So that would tell you that you've got a prevalence of hydrophytic vegetation, and that based on the plants, you'd be in a wetland here. And you would also check the soils, and if the two concur, then that area would be considered a wetland. And I thank you for that. And I guess if we have time, I guess we could take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. We had a very lively conversation in the chat about vernal pools and state and federal regulations around vernal pools while Mark was describing the town of New Paltz laws. So if there are any questions, I don't see anything in the Q&A box. So I'll give folks a minute to stick any questions in, and otherwise, we'll keep going and have some time at the end. Oh, there's one. So we have a question. Are the wetland inspection findings available publicly?
No, they're not. I share them with the building inspector, and usually they get shared with the landowner, but no, they're not made public.
Great. How did you come up with the different buffer sizes, the 50-foot versus the 100-foot buffer zones?
Well, I wasn't involved in the, the passage of the code or the language that went into it itself. So I don't know where those originated. We'd have to talk to someone who's involved in the, it was several years, I know, at least in the making, and before I was involved here in the town. So I don't have an answer for that.
Thank you. They're all coming in now, all the questions. So we probably just have time for one more. And then if we have time after Nava's presentation, we'll get back to these. So does, oh my goodness, there's so many good ones here. Okay. If a future property owner isn't aware of the findings, would a second inspection need to be completed and paid for? So you had mentioned the first inspection would be free.
Right. Yeah, I believe I haven't had that happen, but I believe if there's already been a free inspection on the property, then the landowner would have to pay for the time for me to go out there and have a look. I believe that's the way it would work. And there's also cases where, the landowner gets the one free inspection, but if someone's actually proceeding with an application and there's a review and maybe they interact with the planning board, then they cover, the landowner covers the costs of that review as well. So it's that one inspection that's free.
Great. And then just one more question. Does the town code call for the wetlands map to be updated annually based on field delineations?
It does. It does. That's tricky because there's, if you look at that map and the scale that it's at, and the properties are small, but yes, we keep track of any field delineations that I do so that they can be used to update the map. And I should be clear, the property visits don't always include an actual delineation. It really depends. I mean, there's a wide range of conversations that take place. Maybe they just want to know if there are wetlands on their property. If they don't have something specific proposed, then they may not want me to do a delineation. In some cases, if it's big property, it would take me a long time to do a delineation, in which case I will just sort of generally tell them where the wetland boundaries are, as opposed to doing a formal delineation with a GPS unit. So it really depends on the application.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for your presentation, and hopefully we can get back to some of these good questions. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Nava Tabak from Scenic Hudson for her talk.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Emily, for inviting me to give you a little bit of a perspective and some examples of stream buffer protection and restoration from a land trust perspective. I'll start out by introducing those of you who don't know Scenic Hudson to us. And the picture in the background here is Storm King Mountain. And Scenic Hudson was really born as an advocacy organization when a number of individual citizens got together to protect this mountain from a power plant, the mountain and the river ecosystem. And somewhere along the way after that, Scenic Hudson also became a land trust. Capable of actually acquiring and protecting lands. So we're kind of a unique hybrid organization that may not be typical of your local land trust, but nonetheless, I'll try to give a land trust perspective that applies more broadly with some of my examples. But just to reiterate that point, every land trust has its own priorities. And so for Scenic Hudson, those priorities are largely around ecosystems and habitat and biodiversity conservation. They're about conserving working farmlands, about protecting water resources, providing recreational opportunities and access to the Hudson River for all people, and increasingly also around climate resilience and mitigation. But even these photos really reflect my bias as an ecologist and biologist, and it's also kind of hard to show a photo of climate mitigation or of some of the other work that is done within Scenic Hudson. But I think that protecting water resources is a very, very common type of priority for other land trusts. So this is not at all unique to Scenic Hudson. This map here shows the 10 counties along the Hudson River Estuary, and that's primarily where Scenic Hudson works to conserve lands. And there are
Okay,
Thanks, Judy.
they have different buffers than we do. That's interesting.
I really appreciated that whole web series. I'm sorry if it was dry to any of you guys,
I
but
guess you can put me on.
to know that other towns are, on it like we are.
Yeah, well, I thought the first one was, oh, there's Peter. I didn't realize Laurel was Peter.
I have this obsession with vernal pools too, so that doesn't.
Peter, did you want to watch the other one or no?
No, I'm pretty familiar with the land trust stuff, and it really doesn't affect us that much. I think
And that was my thought.
the first half of that one we just watched was really interesting in New Paltz.
Yeah.
There was a few differences than ours, but
Yep. I wrote a few notes down, and we maybe want to talk about, like, they use 100 feet for all perennial streams, and we don't even include intermittents, and probably we should. So
we have our code. It's written, it's signed, sealed, delivered, and the only thing we don't have is the Wetland Inspector. But we have our code, and it's very clear. There are differences. We go from top of bank for our buffers, and they were showing from the centerline stream, but they were showing a lot bigger buffers than ours. I think the biggest issue that we have to deal with, that Judy and I talked about, is that the map is not clear enough as to where individual buffers are, because it used to be people would think one stream had the same buffer for the whole length of the stream, and that's not true.
Oh, Peter, Oscar, who is on this call, is our intern from Vassar, and he is working on taking that JPEG map and making it something we can use in meetings, like recreating it as a shapefile that we can use in meetings.
Okay, as that wetlands inspector in New Paltz said, it's his call, and when the inspector goes out, they tell you it is or it isn't, and if it is, you need to go get it delineated and put on a map, and that's what we do.
No, I was talking about the permanent stream buffers, which are designated in our law as different widths depending on the slope. And we've got that JPEG map, which shows where those are, but it's hard to apply those because the scale is so large.
Right, but the point is that the Wetlands and Watercourses Inspector is the one that makes that determination in the field. He's the one that says you got to go 100 foot from here or 50 foot from here, whatever it is.
Okay.
That's the Wetlands Inspector does that. You really can't do it from maps. You have to do it in the field. Anyway, it was very interesting. I hope everybody on the board and maybe the WEC guys were watching it. It's something that's very, very important for our town, obviously. And,
They're gone now, but they were here before.
They were, yeah.
So is there anybody else on the board have any further discussion regarding that, or can we move on with our agenda?
I was very happy to watch it. I thought it was really useful.
Me too.
Certainly was. Certainly was. Okay, Stuart, you had a question?
No, actually, I forgot the question. It was two hands clapping, but as long as you got me, the New Paltz Wetlands Inspector, what is his credential? Do you know? It said PW something. Is there like a credential for wetland water inspectors?
There sure is. It's quite a procedure. I went through it.
Yeah.
It's a long course up in Albany. You go every day, you dig holes, you identify plants, you actually go sit in classrooms and take flowers apart and look at petals. There's books you have to buy, very expensive books that go through everything, even that soils indicator book that we showing you. That's $100 book there for the soils indicator. Yeah, there's quite a bit to becoming a wetlands inspector. You do it through the Army Corps of Engineers, and then there's a big test at the end, a really serious test like you've never seen since college. It's quite a process.
Did Ellen go through that process?
I'm the only one that's gone through it in this town. But as the New Paltz inspector,
I think Ellen had done something, maybe not to the extent of what you did. I know you know more than I do. Well, yeah.
Yeah, you need a certificate from the Army Corps of Engineers is what it comes down to. But one thing that was interesting was that the New Paltz Wetlands Inspector made it clear that it's a paid position. Ours isn't. And so it's going to be tough to get somebody to volunteer to do that.
Absolutely.
But other than that, no, that's the situation. So any other questions regarding that? And
What is likely to happen with that position, since Butch probably doesn't have that background?
No, it's quite a process. You know, I was in marine biology for 10 years before I did that. So it's biology, and it's a lot of it. And then it's a lot of time in the field knowing streams. And they make mistakes. I spent the summer realigning several streams for the DEC. A couple of summers ago, and this summer went right back to where it was after spending maybe $10 million. We even lost a man, died on the scene. So it's, you know, don't mess with Mother Nature. Changing streams is not a good idea. Just respecting them.
Peter?
Yes.
Another quick question. So when applicants come before us and we tell them that they need to have a wetlands delineator map out the wetlands on the parcel, where do they go to find a wetlands delineator?
Well, there's several of them. There's most of the big ones are attached to serving engineering companies. There's North Country Ecological Services. They're up by near Albany. There's several others. There are enough of them around.
Does Barry Mendenhoff have one on staff?
I don't think Barry does, but Chazen does.
But if we require it, they have to hire somebody for the purpose.
Yes, and they have to be licensed to do that, correct. And
I think they work with someone who does it at Medicare.
I would imagine.
I think they have somebody, you know, on their.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, to Stuart's question, I'm not sure where we stand in legal waters because, no pun intended, because without a wetlands inspector in our town law requires that. That's the Wetlands and Watercourse Protection Law requires an inspector. So we'll see what happens with that. Luckily, right now, we have the resources that Judy has available from Hudsonia and so on that give us a pretty good indication.
And by the way, we also have soil types.
Yes, but you have to, that's what that augurs for. You won't know the soil till you actually core
No,
right
no,
down in.
Hudsonia and NWI gave us those. And again, when you get down to the actual parcel, somebody's got to go out and look. But we can say our maps indicate that you've got hydric soils there. You need to get it evaluated.
And that's all online. That's the National Soil Indicators thing. It's right online. You can look at your area and look very carefully at the soils, and they're quite right. I believe me. They're pretty close.
I'm sure that's where NWI got them, and all I did was clip them down to our town so that they're manageable.
Yeah. That's but that's what the Wetlands and Watercourses Inspector would do. Of course, he would look at those hydric soils. He would look at the soils indicator maps, and get those indications. All right. Well, those are two good videos showing what we should be looking at. So if no other questions on that.
Well, I have one, Peter.
What's that?
I'm thinking about that property where we had the little piece they wanted to cut off and there was lots of wetlands. And our law says mitigate. How does one mitigate?
Which one's that? The one that?
The one that's right on the edge of Hurley, and it has something going out of Hurley, which I've been informed is not in fact a driveway, but a water course.
Yeah, that's a drainage easement. That's a drainage.
So they can't put a driveway there, although they thought they could.
Well, they shouldn't, no. It's a drainage easement. It's for water to go down.
Well, in a way, that's Hurley's problem and not ours, but they have to have access to the property. And as I remember it, you identified that they were putting a septic system in a buffer. So I kind of assumed that if they made the property larger, maybe they could mitigate, but I'm not clear on what constitutes appropriate mitigation.
Well, from the videos we just saw for the protection of watercourses, you can see that in that particular property, no place is available for development. From one end to the other needs, that's all, it's all. Well, Stuart was there. He walked through the muck.
I remember you saying it was wet.
So, yeah, that's.
Say it again, it was wet.
That's.
So if they come back to us, what are we going to tell them?
That it's a protected area. That's what the guy just said, and that's what our code just says. Those areas are protected.
As of right now, no word from lawyers, so let's fingers crossed.
Those are protected areas. Yeah, so all right. Anybody else on the board have any questions regarding this the webinars that we just saw? If not, let's go on to unfinished business. We have to make a motion to approve a draft resolution for Zhang Inspector Shamus, which is Planning Board Case 22-1172A. Stuart, if you're available, could you do that?
Yeah, although I apologize, I don't have my agenda in front of me.
Oh,
so,
okay.
But
You can second, you read it.
why don't you just I'll move Peter's motion as he just stated.
Perfect.
Okay.
Second.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion.
Okay, the next one is the motion to approve credits for Judith Kerman for attending the Cornell University Disability State Northeast Webinar on June 28th.
So
Okay.
moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's
Aye.
unanimous.
Thank you.
Mazel
Now,
tov.
last but not least, is the HOTF proposed zoning revisions. And just prior to this meeting, I did get an email from Stuart saying that this proposal really changes quite a lot of our zoning code.
You bet.
And Stuart felt not comfortable with us just going ahead presenting that without getting a professional planner involved. So
Peter,
Stuart, if you want to
Well,
address that.
first of all, I was just speaking for myself. I'm not comfortable or uncomfortable with how other people might feel about it. I don't know how they feel about it. It's just when I've been trying to, I read through the materials, but it feels like I would have to start at square one to really get my head around what it all means. And even then, I may be missing some implications that people with professional eyeballs on it wouldn't. And so I'm reluctant to even take the dive in because I'm just going to spend 20, 30 hours and not really knowing if I'm really seeing what I need to see without a plan or shaping or thing. But that's my own prejudice about it. If other people feel, more comfortable, then that will be up to them. But I raise it because I'm not comfortable putting input into this without getting my own input from someone who can boil it down for me and make sure I'm not missing anything.
Okay,
Can I comment on that?
sure, Judy, go ahead.
Obviously, I know it probably as well as anybody other than Nan and maybe Kirk and Deborah. And I suggested that it would be an appropriate thing to have Matt do a seminar with us, a deep dive. Now, I do think that there are two documents on there. Well, one in particular, the summary of changes, which is about 6 pages, and it talks about what we were trying to accomplish. The other thing somebody could do, I mean, it's a problem that there's too many documents on that link. It's just too much. We didn't need to have Bill's letter about it. If you read the summary, which is, I don't remember how many pages, but not very many, and it's plain English. If you wanted to dig in, you could print out the annotated table of contents and look at the areas that are changed. But I think Stuart is right that the actual implications in practice, which is why they want input from us in the first place, it's going to require a lot of new thinking about what we're doing for some kinds of cases, probably a lot of cases. And to have Matt look at it and absorb it and pay him for the time to absorb it and then do a training session for us, which I think would appropriately be continuing education for the people on the board, just makes sense to me. Now, whether we can do that before we've given the town board feedback, I don't know what to do about that. They want to know how we think it's going to affect us. But having worked on it, I can tell you, I can imagine, but I don't know. And that's
One thing, Judy, that Stuart's quite right about, that Matt, any planner, but Matt could help us with, is the procedure. What you guys have done is come up with the ideas of what you want to change, but it's the actual procedure going through the sequers and all those procedures that Matt would have valuable input on. To make sure you're actually proceeding the right way.
I agree. Now, I want to add one point. I am going to contact Deborah and Kirk and Nan and ask for a list of specific things that towns that do those 50% reserved for open land thing do with that. How is the taxation handled? That's an area that I questioned when we first started working on it in the committee. How is taxation handled? What kinds of governance are used? Are the lands divided up among some of the property owners and then given access to the other people in the subdivision? It's complicated, and there have to be good examples of it, since Nan insists that this has been done in other places. And for us to evaluate how to do that without models of good ways to do it is very hard.
Right, and that's why Matt's input would be very good, because it's a question of, going through the right procedures. And
when you say procedures, you're talking about implementing. How is it going to be?
Yes.
How are the goals going to be implemented?
How do we actually do it in a meeting with a case?
Right, and does the law address a particular way of doing it, or does it leave it open? And I don't know.
so Stuart, I guess my question, Stuart, is are you okay with the planning board sending this memo that Judy wrote to the town board as is for right now? Just, it's a response. It's our response to their questions about how we feel about. Go ahead, Melissa.
I can piggyback off that memo and in the email say that the planning board had a conversation at this meeting and would really like to retain Matt Rudikoff to read and teach, do a seminar, do a workshop, like exactly what you said, the continuing ed credit.
Well-
And just as like a topic in the email with our, like, this is our draft, this is our initial thoughts, but this is what we're asking for.
Well, to answer Peter's question that he asked me, I don't want to, I'm not comfortable signing off on any response to the town board's question until I'm comfortable with what I'm answering, and I'm not comfortable until I hear from Matt. So I wouldn't want to sign off on it. If you're asking me that, that's my answer.
I'm wondering how Connor and Brian feel.
I would definitely agree. I mean, I know that it doesn't necessarily take up all 300 pages or whatever.
It doesn't. Nowhere near.
But it's still a substantial change, and I'm always of the mind that more input is better than less.
Did you guys look at the memo that I took from all your suggestions?
See, I don't want to go with that because for one thing, it's got Peter's question about build out analysis, and that's not really relevant to the question we are being asked.
It's out.
So I think
I agree with that, because you're not going to get an answer to the build out analysis for at least a year or two.
right. What I want to ask is this. I mean, Brian's got himself unmuted, so maybe he ought to have a comment before I say anything else.
Thanks, Judy. You know, my thoughts are that I don't know enough. And I would like to know more to make an informed opinion. But quite frankly, it's a lot of information, and I don't have the time or bandwidth to, you know, I would normally want more information before I would make a decision. And so to answer Judy's question, it's partially my responsibility to do that, and I don't do that, but this is also a very big issue. So I hear what Stuart's saying, and I think I know how Stuart thinks about these things, and I don't disagree with him on this.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
If everybody reads that summary document, which is short, I don't remember if it's 6 pages, it may be less than that. I think we could say, if we agree, that the goals stated in that document are ones that we support. But then that speaking to the specifics of the code requires us to know much more than most of us have the technical skills to get just by reading it. And that for that reason, we would like Matt to train us. So I think we could look at that 6 page or whatever page it is, not long, and it's prose, it's not legal jargon, with all due respect, Stuart. And if we look at that document and we agree that we support the goals of it, we may be giving the town board enough that they can go forward. But then there's all the rest of it, and that the rest of it we really do need training on. I know it better than probably anybody else, certainly than anybody else in this group, except maybe Melissa, because I know she's looked at it also. And I think the questions Stuart's asked, which get down to the nitty-gritty of if there's something in there that's really kind of problematic in practice, we need to know about it. And that's, in a way, the kind of feedback that the town board is asking us to give, but we are not really equipped to give it. And other people are just giving them whatever they give them.
Well, of course, the side B of this 45 RPM record is that there's an unwillingness on the part of, apparent unwillingness on the part of the town governors to fund our planner unless there's an applicant funding it.
Well, they need to do this.
Let me finish my thought though, Judy, respectfully. I don't think that that the town should have it both ways with us, because they're taking advantage, and I don't feel equipped to provide an answer on this. And it's not because I'm unintelligent. It's just that I'm sure there are impacts that I would never see if I read it 10 times. And it is a matter of proposed major revision of provisions of the code. And, we're volunteers, we're lay people for the most part. And I'm not comfortable giving them an answer except to say, something along the lines that we need to consult with our planner in order to answer your questions properly. Please advise as to funding or something like that, rather than give them a longer justification of the reasoning and all, because I don't feel like we should have to justify it.
So you're not comfortable even reading the summary document and saying we like the general direction of this?
I'm comfortable reading it, but why give that to them? They're not giving us what we need, a lot. So why give that to them at all?
Can I chime in here, please? Stuart, I concur with you on this, and I think that's, quite frankly, it's a good negotiation strategy. But to Judy's point, I also like to get something done. That's typically my MO. But I think in this case, I think it would not be prudent to do this. So I think I align with Stuart on this.
It's too bad John is not on the calling works. I sense that he would have strong feelings about it.
All right, Stuart. I agree with
He
you.
did agree, John Lavelle did agree with, he said, as usual, Judy's on the ball. And he agreed with getting Matt and demanding that they give us Matt.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I agree to get more input. And I also just want to point out that this is a project been in the making for a long time. Many committees have worked on affordable housing, and this one's made a lot of progress. But I think I agree with Stuart that we need to make sure that what we're presenting is done in the right way. And to be honest, there's no rush, because I don't think the town board is jumping up and down to get our response. So let's just make it correct. I agree with Stuart. Let's get Matt on board and put it together.
I'm fine with it.
All right.
Are you guys okay if I send a real generic email to town board supervisor saying that this is what we request? Very simple.
Yeah.
Before we can provide our input,
And
we need to
we're not
confer
giving
with
an
our
answer.
planner.
This is what we want, yes.
I think that's the correct thing to do. Yeah.
And Judy, if I may, I will commit to reading that 6-page document this weekend.
It's worth doing anyway, but I support the idea of putting it back on Bill's desk and getting the kind of technical support we really need.
Because after all, he wants planning input. We have a planner. We do the best we can, but on something of this scope,
yep,
it would be hubris to presume that we can see all the impacts of what they're proposing.
Having been in the weeds there, I have to agree with you.
Yeah. So, it could be nice about it, but this is what we need really to do a proper input. And why would they want anything less?
Well, I would like to be able to report that to the Housing Oversight Task Force, if I might, that we really feel the need for professional guidance on this. I think we will support the goals, but we need to understand what we're getting into, and we're not equipped to do that without further support. The fact that Nan is also a planner doesn't take us the whole way, because she's not our planner.
Right, so she may have I get
Agreed.
it. We should use our planner. Didn't Nan?
All right. It's definitely a work with good intent. And I'm sure at some point we'd like to achieve this objective. But let's, Melissa, do what you said. I guess either table it for now or send what you're going to send. And let's put it back on the agenda whenever you find time for it.
But I think that language about we think the intent is worthy, and we just need to understand it. So it's not like we're saying no, we're not saying it's bad, we're saying we need to understand it, and we need professional help to do that.
Right.
Correct. All right. Very productive evening. Certainly learned a lot. Anybody have any last minute questions, or we could entertain a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all for watching that webinar. It was very informative, and I think it'll help us in our thoughts in the future. And everybody have a good 4th of July.
You too.
And take next week off on me.
I'm off.
Melissa, if you want to send me a draft, I'm happy to look at it.
Okay, perfect. I'm gonna make it really simple, Judy. I'll do it.
Really,
I'll do it now.
really simple.
Yeah.
I want there a little sugar in there.
I know. We'll go back and forth before I leave tonight.
Thank you, Peter, for chairing. Thanks, everybody, for the participation, and thank you, Melissa, and have a good week.
Those were great
Thank you.
seminars. I'm
Thank
glad
you.
we got
everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Good night, all, and have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye. Judy, I'll email you in a few seconds.
Okay.